Welcome to Daily Wisdom, Walking the Path with the Buddha, a podcast shared by David Roylance. This podcast is dedicated to guiding you to completely eliminate the discontent mind and the suffering it causes by attaining enlightenment. Learn and practice the teachings of Gotama Buddha that will guide you to fully attain a peaceful, calm, serene, and content mind with joy. To support this podcast, visit patreon.com/support Buddha or visit buddhadailywisdom.com, where you will discover a full range of courses, retreats, and online learning resources to assist you on the path to enlightenment. Now, here's our teacher to share more.
Sawadee Kap. Hello and welcome to Daily Wisdom, Walking the Path with the Buddha. Today is our Pali Canon and English study group, and we're studying the words of the Buddha. We're in volume 11 of our book series, which is titled The Realms of Existence. We're going to be studying chapters 91 through 100 today, and we're actually in the category or subsection of the book titled Heavenly Beings. So the discourses are all about heavenly beings. There's been some others that we've already studied, but now we're into these collection of the next 10 chapters. The way that I do this particular program is I invite students who are in Zoom to be able to volunteer to read a chapter from the book. Then after someone reads it, I will share some teachings on that. Then I'll open up for questions from anybody, whether you're in Facebook, YouTube, or Zoom. You can ask questions about the chapter that we're reading by putting that into the comment section, or you can electronically raise your hand in Zoom and then unmute your microphone and ask any and all questions that you like. So is there anybody in Zoom who would like to volunteer to read this first chapter? Okay, it looks like Vibhav and Samantha, so we'll just take everybody in order. Maybe Samantha, you can read the next one.
Chapter 91, Fruits from Residing in Formless Perceptions and Considering Impermanence. Here, with the complete overcoming of perceptions of forms, with the passing away of perceptions of sensory impingement, with non-attention to perceptions of diversity, perceiving space as infinite, a monk enters and resides in the base of infinity of space. He considers whatever objects exist that are related to feeling, perception, volitional formations, choices, decisions, and consciousness as impermanent, discontentedness, an illness, a boil, a dart, misery, affliction, alien, disintegrating, empty, and non-self. He turns his mind away from those objects and directs it to the deathless element, enlightenment, thus. This is peaceful, this is superb. That is, this stilling of all activities, the letting go of all material gain, the destruction of craving, freedom from strong feelings, elimination, nibbana, enlightenment. If he is firm in this, he attains the destruction of the taints, fetters. But if he does not attain the destruction of the taints because of that craving for the teachings, because of the excitement in the teachings, then with the complete destruction of the five lower fetters, he becomes one of the spontaneous birth. Due to attain final nibbana, final enlightenment, there without ever returning from that world. Just as an archer or an archer's apprentice undergo training on a straw man or a heap of clay, and then at a later time becomes a long-distance shooter, a sharp shooter, one who splits a great body. In references to the base of infinite consciousness and the base of nothingness, identical teachings to the base of infinite space were spoken. The case of the first jhana, the second jhana, the third jhana, and the fourth jhana were spoken, but the differences to see impermanence in the five aggregates: form, feeling, perception, volitional formations, choices, decisions, and consciousness. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Vibhav. So here, there's some details that the Buddha is sharing that's going to help you to be able to understand what he's teaching in terms of this first part. He's talking about overcoming perceptions. What a perception is there is a view or opinion about how something seems to be, and it may or may not even be true. And what the unenlightened mind tends to do is it tends to cling to its perceptions. So you could walk into a certain environment clinging to a perception, and now you're making unwise decisions because that perception or that assumption that the mind is making is actually untrue. And now that unwise decisions going to produce unwholesome results. So as part of the mind getting to enlightenment, it won't cling to perceptions. You'll instead ask questions. I oftentimes help people to understand perceptions through understanding this particular analogy. If you were training to be a police officer, they train you not to cling to your perceptions because you're making life or death decisions. And if you were clinging to a perception, you could actually make a very unwise decision that's going to produce an unwholesome result. So if a police officer was dispatched to a convenience store because a call came over the radio that this store was being robbed, and maybe when they rush down there, they sling open the door and they see someone in a black hoodie holding a gun, and there's someone on the floor with a gunshot wound and they're bleeding out. Well, if the police officer has the perception that this person in the black hoodie with the gun is the robber, they might just sling open the door, pull out their gun, and start shooting. And they might have actually just shot an innocent person, because what might have happened is that person in the black hoodie could be the cashier. And they somehow maneuvered the gun out of this robber's hands, and they actually shot the robber. So what police officers are trained to do is walk into the store and pull out their gun and say, "Police, police, put down the gun." Because if you're the robber and you turn and you hear that, you hear the police, you're going to point your gun at the police officer, and that's when they're going to shoot you. But if you're actually the cashier and you hear, "Police, police, put down the gun," it's like, thank goodness there's help here. Excellent. And you're going to put down the gun, right? So if you clung to your perceptions here that the person in the black hoodie holding the gun is the robber, you could actually make a decision to shoot this person and kill an innocent person. And this would produce unwholesome results in your day-to-day life. So the Buddha teaches you throughout his teachings to not cling to perceptions. And the way that you do that is by asking questions. Another example that I oftentimes share with students is, like, say you had children and you asked them to clean their room. And you said, "Hey, I'm going to be gone for an hour, please clean your room, I'll be back and we can talk then." And maybe you leave and you come back an hour later and you go into their room and there's like books spread all over the floor, like a complete disarray. And if you were clinging to your perceptions, maybe your perception is that they didn't clean your room. And if you had a craving for them to listen to you and clean the room, you might start yelling and hollering and producing unwholesome results in this situation. But if you understand that, hey, I've been gone for an hour from this place and I don't know whether this person was cleaning the room or not, all I'm doing is walking in and seeing books all over the floor, I can't cling to any perception of what may or may not happen. Instead, you might say, "Hey, I thought you were supposed to clean your room. What happened?" And maybe what you hear back from the child is, "Yeah, Mom, yeah, Dad, I did clean my room. I actually cleaned it very thoroughly and I've been done for like the last 15, 20 minutes. Right before you came in, I bumped into my bookshelf and it threw all these books all over the floor, and I was just getting ready to pick them up as you walked in," right? And now you're like, "Oh, okay, I understand," right? But if you clung to your perceptions there, thinking that they didn't clean their room, it could lead to all kinds of unwise decisions. So the Buddha is teaching you to always ensure that you're not clinging to any perceptions. And here he's talking about perceptions of forms, that you're not clinging to any physical form, right? But you could also cling to your feelings or your perceptions. You could cling to your volitional formations or the choices and decisions. You can cling to a consciousness. There's all kinds of clinging that could occur, but you're not interested in clinging to any perceptions about anything whatsoever. You're always interested in asking questions to find out information so that then you'll know the truth. And by asking questions skillfully, you'll be able to come to a conclusion on what the truth is. So now if an individual has eliminated their clinging to perceptions, they're able to enter and reside as they go forward on the path in these various formless attainments. These are the jhanas, the 4 jhanas, and then there's formless attainments beyond that. And as I've mentioned to you guys before, I've never committed those to memory because not everybody experiences them, and there's nothing special that you need to learn in order to be able to experience those. Either you will experience them or you won't. I've detailed what these formless attainments are in volume 7, so you can find them in there if you're interested in understanding what these are. But beyond this, what the Buddha is now talking about is that you understand that feelings, perceptions, volitional formations, and consciousness, that it's impermanent, that it's constantly changing, that if the mind craves for permanence, it's going to lead to discontentedness. And what you start to do is you start to see discontentedness as undesirable, as this illness, this boil, this dart, this misery, this affliction, this alien, meaning being disinterested or foreign, something that you're not interested in here. And then you would like to ultimately get to the point where you've realized non-self. This is going to help you to be able to move through the attainments. Then the Buddha is saying, okay, if you turn your mind away from those objects, meaning you're not clinging to any particular forms, and you understand that forms are impermanent, and you direct your mind towards enlightenment. He sometimes refers to enlightenment as the deathless element, because once you get to enlightenment, it's not considered that you're dying at that point. Once you get to the end of this life, that you're just experiencing final enlightenment, that there's no more death once somebody has actually gotten to enlightenment. So he sometimes refers to this as the deathless element. That's why I put enlightenment here, because some people don't know that. So what he's saying here is that if you turn your mind towards the development of the mind to be able to get to enlightenment, this is peaceful, this is superb. This is where the mind can be trained to eliminate craving, desire, attachment, letting go of all material gain. Now, you're going to need to acquire certain material things in your life as you progress, even on the path to enlightenment. There's enlightened beings who are actually quite wealthy, who are millionaires, right? Like, this is possible. It's not about whether you have money or not, because that's not what the problem is. The problem is that if you long and yearn and crave for material gain, that's what's causing the problem. So you need to let go of material gain where your mind's not craving and longing and yearning, because that's not what leads to peace and joy. If getting money led to happiness, then rich people would always be happy and they would never commit suicide. So if money leads to happiness, then we would see rich people are always happy and they never commit suicide. But that's not the truth. You can actually see that rich people actually sometimes commit suicide because money doesn't lead to happiness. So you need to let go of the craving for more and more and more material gain. And through the destruction of that craving, an individual comes to the freedom of strong feelings where they've eliminated discontentedness, and that is enlightenment. So now the way that an individual accomplishes that is they attain the destruction of the taints or the fetters. This is where you're purifying your mind of those 10 individual pollutions that the Buddha discovered. And the Buddha is saying, okay, if this individual has worked towards the destruction of the taints, but they still have craving for the teachings and excitement in the teachings, because this is something that the mind can actually have in your journey to enlightenment. You can actually be longing, yearning, and craving to learn more and 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 more. And the mind is almost like craving enlightenment. Well, if your mind is doing that, you wouldn't actually be able to get to it. But if you are all the way on the other side, where you could care less about your inner growth and your inner development, you're not going to get to improvement in your life or to enlightenment there either. So that's why you like to pursue the path to enlightenment from the middle, where you're gradually working towards the goal, objective, or interest to improve the condition of your mind. And that's going to include the elimination of the 10 fetters. And by the way, tomorrow I'm going to be starting a retreat at 3 p.m., which we're going to spend an entire hour to an hour and a half on each individual fetter over the course of an entire week, where I explain what it is, the symptoms of it, how to eliminate it, and how to know that you've eliminated it, because this is what somebody's going to need to know as they're making their way from the first stage of enlightenment and beyond into enlightenment. So here the Buddha is talking about eliminating this craving for the teachings and this excitement in the teachings, but instead there's this middle way that you can gradually walk towards enlightenment. And now he's saying, okay, if their 5 lower fetters have been eliminated, you guys probably know that this person's in the 3rd stage of enlightenment. And because of that, one will then experience birth in the heavenly realm, right? This is what he's talking about here. He becomes one of spontaneous birth. He doesn't mention the heavenly realm here, but if you understand his teachings and you understand what it means to eliminate the 5 lower fetters, you know that the mind's in the 3rd stage of enlightenment and there's going to be rebirth in the heavenly realm. And they're due to attain final enlightenment there without ever returning from that world. That's the 3rd stage of enlightenment as a non-returner. So that's why this chapter is in this section about the heavenly realm, because that's one of the ways that an individual would get to the heavenly realm is by eliminating the 5 lower fetters. That's not the only way, but that's one of the ways. And now the Buddha kind of sums this up with this example that people would have understood during his lifetime, which is this individual who's undergoing training to shoot a bow and arrow. And just like this person becomes an expert at being able to shoot, becoming this sharpshooter, the same thing is true for one who's honing their mind and cultivating wisdom to get to enlightenment. It's the same thing. The mind is becoming an expert in the teachings. Even though you don't see yourself that way, because that would be the conceit of the mind, you would like to just look at it as, okay, you're cultivating wisdom and making your way to enlightenment, but you wouldn't be interested in designating yourself as an expert on the teachings, although that's what somebody would ultimately be by the time they get to enlightenment. So the Buddha is basically describing that as someone who has learned how to shoot a bow and arrow and essentially become an expert with that. An individual who's trained their mind to this third stage of enlightenment, and enlightenment would essentially be becoming an expert in the teachings. And as part of this, they would have already experienced the attainments. Not all of the attainments, but they would have potentially experienced all of them. They would definitely have already experienced the first, second, third, and fourth jhanas. That's for anybody who's making their way even to the first stage of enlightenment. They would experience those enhanced qualities of mind that are experienced in the jhanas. But these other attainments that you guys can learn about in Volume 7, not everybody will experience those. There's some that everybody will experience, but there's some that not everybody will experience. So let me know what questions you guys have on this chapter. You can put that into Facebook, YouTube, or Zoom, or you can raise your hand in Zoom and ask any questions that you like. So it looks like Richard has a question. Go ahead, sir.
It's possibly two questions from the first paragraph there. The first is with non-attention to perceptions of diversity. What's actually meant by perceptions of diversity?
You know, I'd have to look at this more closely to be able to give you an answer on that. Let me look at that after class, Richard, and I'll let you know.
And then just the final part of that first paragraph, you might want to look this up again, but I'm slightly confused with perceiving space as infinite. And then a monk enters and resides in the base of the infinity of space. Is that meant as the same thing there? Or are they opposites?
This is referring to entering into the attainment that is referred to as the space is infinite. There's some formless attainments that are beyond the jhanas, but you typically will experience them during that period of time that your mind is in the jhanas. This is referring to one of the other attainments, and this is where Volume 7 comes in, and you can find them there. But what I'll do when I look up the non-attention to perception of diversity, I will send you that information, and I'll also send you the place in Volume 7 where you can find the information about these attainments. Because that's what he's talking about here, that the individual, by perceiving space as infinite, that means the individual is entering into that attainment.
Okay.
You're welcome. Okay, looks like Vibhav has a question. Go ahead, sir.
Yeah, also wondering what is perceptions of sensory impingement. Not clear.
Yeah, so what this is where an individual understands the central desire. That your mind here, what he's talking about is with the passing away of perception of sensory impingement. Because as long as you have central desire in the mind, it's impeding you from making progress. So as an individual is moving through these enhanced qualities of mind, through the jhanas and these other attainments, you're letting go of central desire, and that's diminishing more and more. So you're letting that go, and it's no longer impeding you from forward progress. Where prior to being on the path, or even early on in your journey, the mind's still clinging to so many central desires.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Okay, let me see if we have any questions on Facebook or YouTube. Rex, yes, you can join Zoom if you like. Inside the description here of the video that you're watching on Facebook, there is the login for Zoom. So you're welcome, Rex, to be able to join us in Zoom if you'd like. Okay, so I don't see anything else. So let's go to chapter 92. I think Samantha was going to read this one.
Thank you, Teacher David. The heavenly beings of the pure abodes. Once, monks, I was staying at Ukata in the Sabgaha Grove at the foot of the great Sal tree. And as I resided there in seclusion, it occurred to me, there is no abode of beings easily accessible that has not been visited by me for so long as that of the heavenly beings of the pure abodes. Suppose I were to visit them now. And then, as swiftly as a strong man might stretch his flexed arm or flex it again, I vanished from Ukata and appeared among the Aviha heavenly beings. And many thousands of them came to me, saluted me, and stood to one side. Then they said, Sir, it is 91 eons since the Buddha Vipassi appeared in the world. And we, sir, who live the holy life with guidance from the Buddha Vipassi, having freed ourselves from sense desires, have arisen here. And many thousands of them came to me, saluted me, and stood to one side. And then they said, Sir, it is 31 eons since the Buddha Sikhi appeared in the world. And we, sir, who live the holy life with the guidance from the Buddha Sikhi, having freed ourselves from sense desires, have arisen here. And many thousands of them came to me, saluted me, and stood to one side. Then they said, Sir, it is in the same 31st eon since the Buddha Vasubhu appeared in the world. And we, sir, who live the holy life with guidance from the Buddha Vasubhu, having freed ourselves from sense desires, have arisen here. And many thousands of them came to me, saluted me, and stood to one side. Then they said, Sir, in this present fortunate eon, since the Buddha Kakusanda appeared in the world, and we, sir, who live the holy life with guidance from the Buddha Kakusanda, having freed ourselves from sense desires, have arisen here. And many thousands of them came to me, saluted me, and stood to one side. Then they said, Sir, in this present fortunate eon, since the Buddha Kanagamana appeared in the world, then they said, Sir, in this present fortunate eon, since the Buddha Kassapa appeared in the world, and we, sir, who live the holy life with guidance from the Buddha Kassapa, having freed ourselves from sense desires, have arisen here. And many thousands of them came to me, saluted me, and stood to one side. They said, Sir, in this fortunate eon now, Buddha has arisen in the world. He was born of Katya ethnic group and arose in Katya family. He is of the Gotama clan. And we, sir, who have lived the holy life under the Buddha, having freed ourselves from sense desires, have arisen here. Then I went with the Aviha heavenly beings to see the Atapa heavenly beings, and with these to see the Sudasa heavenly beings, and with these to see the Sudasi heavenly beings, and with all of these to see the Akanita heavenly beings. And there many thousands of heavenly beings came, saluted me, and stood to one side, saying, Sir, it is 91 eons since the Buddha Vipassi appeared in the world. And so it is, monks, that by his penetration of the fundamentals of the teachings, that the Tathagata remembers the past Buddhas who have attained final nibbana, cutting through multiplicity, blazing a trail, have exhausted the round, have passed by all discontentedness. He recalls their births, their names, their clan, their lifespan, their twin disciples, their assemblies of disciples. These fortunate Buddhas were born thus, were called thus. Thus was their clan, thus was their morality, their teachings, their wisdom, their residing. Thus was their liberation.
Okay, thank you, ma'am. So out of this collection of books in the Pali Canon, the 45 large volumes of books, we know that not everything the Buddha taught is in those books, right? This is the largest, most complete collection that we have of the teachings of the Buddha is the Pali Canon, but we see certain things that the Buddha is teaching in the Pali Canon and in the text, and that we know leads to enlightenment that just isn't in there. Because 2,500 years of history, we can understand that not everything that the Buddha taught during his lifetime is captured in those books. But also, we know that everything that's in those books isn't what the Buddha actually taught as well, because it would be naive of us to think that over 2,500 years of history that what the Buddha taught 2,500 years ago is captured exactly the way he taught it in those books. So we know that there's certain things that have made their way into the Pali Canon that the Buddha actually didn't actually teach. And the way that you come to understand this is through not believing what you see in the Pali Canon, but instead you learn, examine, and investigate the teachings. You reflect on them to independently verify them, and then you practice them to be able to see what is true and what is false. That's what cuts through the impermanence. So there's various things that you're going to come across in the Pali Canon that aren't necessarily original teachings of the Buddha, and you'll be able to discern this. And there'll be some things that you come across that you'll know that the Buddha taught, but they're not in the Pali Canon because there's reference to them. And that's one of the reasons why it's helpful to have a teacher to be able to guide you through, to be able to learn and grow and develop and actually make your way to enlightenment, because you're going to need teachings that aren't actually in the Pali Canon, and you're going to need help navigating your way through this. So this particular discourse is in the book series because this is one of the conflicts that I found in the Pali Canon. It's the only conflict truly that I've actually really truly found. And there's other places where you see this as well, where the Buddha is documented as having talked about other Buddhas that existed prior to him. There's also a place in the Pali Canon where the Buddha is describing that he is the discoverer of the teachings, declarer the path to enlightenment, undeclared before him, meaning there are no other Buddhas prior to him. So this is a conflict where we see documentation of talking about Buddhas prior to Gotama Buddha, but then we see documentation of the Buddha describing that he's the discoverer, the declarer of the path to enlightenment, undeclared before him. So whether there were Buddhas before Gotama Buddha or not, it doesn't really truly matter. I suspect that there weren't any Buddhas before him, but it doesn't really truly matter, because what we have available to us in the teachings of the Buddha, Gotama Buddha, will lead to enlightenment. We know how to attain enlightenment in this life. So whether there were Buddhas before him or not, it doesn't really matter. The conclusion that I've come to is that understanding humanity and the life cycle of humanity, that prior to 2,500 years ago, like 50,000, 100,000, 200,000 years ago, we didn't have the level of intellectual conversation and understanding that was needed in order to be able to guide someone to enlightenment. So once you understand what it takes to actually get to enlightenment, there's a certain level of depth of intellectual learning that needs to be done, that reflection and that practice, and that couldn't have taken place prior to Gotama Buddha, at least during this particular time frame of human history. Because when we first started out as human beings, we were just kind of groaning and munting and, making noises and sounds. We didn't really have intellectual conversation. So up to 2,500 years ago, when Gotama Buddha, Siddhartha Gautama existed, we know that by that time there was enough intellectual conversation that one could be guided to enlightenment through understanding the path. So again, whether there were Buddhas before Gotama Buddha or not, I don't know. I wasn't there. And if there were, great. And if there wasn't, that's fine too. But the goal is to be able to get to enlightenment. And in order to get to enlightenment, you need to be able to not believe anything that you see. Even these books. Don't believe anything that these books share. You need to be able to learn, examine, investigate, reflect on the teachings, and then to practice them. That's what's actually going to bring about the improvement to the condition of your mind. So again, I left this in here so that you guys could see that there are some conflicts in the Pali Canon. And as you guys come across those, if you need help to decipher them and try to figure out what's true or false or what's actually truly needed to be able to get to enlightenment, you're always welcome to reach out to me and I'll help you with that. So do you guys have any questions on this chapter? Okay, I don't see any questions. So we'll move to the next chapter. Is there someone who would like to read this? Actually, you know what? This one, I don't think we're going to read this one. This one actually isn't needed to be read. If you guys read this on your own and you have questions about it, it's actually quite long. It's got a lot of details in here. If you guys have questions on it, I can pause here for a moment for those of you guys that have read it before class. But we don't actually need to read this one as part of our class today. Let me just see if there's questions. Okay, I don't see any questions anywhere. Okay, so let's go to the next one. This is chapter 94. Would anybody like to read this one? Go ahead, Yusuf.
The heavenly beings and the Ashuras or Arai or Bata. Monks. Once in the past, a certain man set out from Rajaga and went to the lotus pond, thinking, I will reflect about the world. He then sat down on the bank of the Sumagada lotus pond, reflecting about the world. Then, monks, the man saw a four-division army entering a lotus stalk on the bank of the pond. Having seen this, he thought, I must be mad. I must be insane. I have seen something that does not exist in the world. The man returned to the city and informed a great crowd of people. I must be mad. Sirs, I must be insane. I have seen something that does not exist in the world. They said to him, but how is it, good man, that you are mad? How are you insane? And what have you seen that does not exist in the world? Here, sirs, I left Rajaga and approached the Sumagada lotus pond, thinking I will reflect about the world. He then sat down on the bank of the Sumagada lotus pond, reflecting about the world. I saw a four-division army entering a lotus stalk on the bank of the pond. That's why I am mad. That's why I am insane. And that's what I have seen that does not exist in the world. Surely you are mad, good man. Surely you are insane. And what you have seen does not exist in the world. Nevertheless, monks, what the man saw was actually real, not unreal. Once in the past, the heavenly beings and the Ashuras were allied for battle. In the battle, the heavenly beings won, and the Ashuras were defeated. In their defeat, the Ashuras were frightened and entered the Ashura city through the lotus stalk to the bewilderment of the heavenly beings. Therefore, monks, do not reflect about the world, thinking the world is eternal, or the world is not eternal, or the world is finite, or the world is infinite, or the soul and the body are the same, or the soul is one thing, the body is another, or the Tathagata exists after death, or the Tathagata does not exist after death, or the Tathagata both exist and do not exist after death, or the Tathagata neither exists nor not exist after death. For what reason? Because, monks, this reflection is unbeneficial, irrelevant to the fundamentals of the holy life, and does not lead to fading away of strong feelings, to freedom from strong feelings, to elimination, to peace, to direct knowledge, experience, to enlightenment, to nibbana. When you reflect, monks, you should reflect. This is disconnectedness. You should reflect. This is the cause of disconnectedness. You should reflect. This is the elimination of disconnectedness. You should reflect. This is the way leading to the elimination of discontentedness. For what reason? Because, monks, this reflection is beneficial, relevant to the fundamentals of the holy life, and leads to fading away of strong feelings, to freedom from strong feelings, to elimination, to peace, to direct knowledge, experience, to enlightenment, to nibbana. Therefore, monks, an effort should be made to understand. This is disconnectedness. An effort should be made to understand this is the cause of disconnectedness, and an effort should be made to understand this is the elimination of disconnectedness. An effort should be made to understand this is the way leading to the elimination of discontentedness.
Okay, thank you, Yusuf. So one of the things that the mind can do in the unenlightened state is it can think about all kinds of different things. It can be wanting information about this thing or that thing or this thing or that thing. And one of the things that the Buddha is doing here, and that a wise teacher would do, is really guide their students and being able to reflect on the things that are really important to be able to attain the ultimate goal being enlightenment. But if the mind is too busy thinking about all these other erroneous things that have nothing to do with actually getting to the elimination of discontentedness and getting to the peace and joy that is enlightenment, a teacher needs to be able to share with the student, hey, what you're thinking about here isn't relevant to getting to enlightenment. You can redirect the mind over here and reflect on these types of things. This is what's actually going to lead to improvement to the condition of your mind. So this is a common thing that the unenlightened mind can do. It can want to know everything about anything and be wandering all over the place. But you really need to discipline the mind so that you can control it and guide it towards this enlightened mental state. So this individual thinking about all these different erroneous things, the Buddha is basically kind of helping this person to hone the mind to be able to see what's really important, to be able to focus on. One of the things that he's talking about here in this discourse are his undeclared teachings. There's a place in his teachings where he talks about these 10 things that he didn't teach. These are his undeclared teachings. And he suggests that you don't reflect on these because he never declared whether these things are true or false or anything about these, whether the world is eternal or not eternal, whether the world is finite or infinite, whether the soul and the body are the same or whether they're one thing versus another, right? He never actually taught whether there is a soul or there isn't a soul. He never taught that at all. And then whether Tathagata exists, does not exist, both exist and does not exist, or neither exists nor does not exist. Essentially what he's talking about here is what happens to an enlightened being after death. He doesn't describe that. He does help you to understand that there isn't rebirth in the cycle of rebirth, but he doesn't say what may or may not come next for an enlightened being, because the goal of this path isn't to acquire some kind of afterlife. Sometimes people believe a bunch of things and then hope something good happens when they die. But if the mind's longing, yearning, and craving for an afterlife, it can't get to peace and joy in the present moment, in your present life. So the Buddha wisely left it undeclared of what may or may not come next for an enlightened being. So referring to himself, the Tathagata, he was an enlightened being, so we can understand that he didn't declare what may or may not come next for an enlightened being. Instead, he's saying, don't reflect on these unbeneficial things, these irrelevant things. Instead, focus on what actually really matters, which is how to eliminate discontentedness. And what he's pointing to here is the Four Noble Truths. He's saying that's what you should be reflecting on, is make sure you have that breakthrough to being able to understand what is discontentedness, what is that problem that he discovered in the mind, what is the cause of that problem, what is the elimination of it, and what is the path forward. And if you've studied with me in any of the foundational classes, you know I've walked you through that to be able to get to the point where you can reflect on that and you can see the truth for yourself about what's really causing these feelings, which is craving, desire, attachment. And it's the Eightfold Path that is going to help you to train your mind to eliminate that. So that's what you'd really like to focus on. So like that previous chapter that we had read about whether there were Buddhas in the past or not, and people like to debate these things and even argue over these things, you can just be understanding like, don't need to know that, right? Because whether there were Buddhas or there weren't Buddhas, it doesn't matter. And sitting there arguing with anybody about anything at all isn't going to lead to your enlightenment, right? So instead of focusing on all that stuff, it's just like, let me just focus on training my own mind to be able to experience this enlightened mental state. And it's the Four Noble Truths that is the beginning of that. So that's why the Buddha is pointing you to that. But of course, there's other things to be able to learn and understand about the path as well, beyond the Four Noble Truths. But that's the starting point. So that's why he encourages people to make an effort to reflect on those things. So let me know what questions you guys have here. I can answer your questions if you'd like to put those into Facebook, YouTube, or Zoom. Or if you'd like to raise your hand in Zoom and ask any questions that way, you surely can. I see y'all's comments here in Zoom about my audio and video freezing. Yeah, there's some issues with storms here. I see Samantha shared that. I can see my internet connection is a little bit unstable today, so just some impermanence here. Looks like Yusuf has a question. Go ahead, sir.
I just would like to share that even though you are freezing, but as I see, we can still understand you, like your video is freezing, but your voice is good, not always freezing, so we can understand.
Okay, perfect. Okay, I don't see any other questions anywhere. So what I'll do is just move on to the next one here, which is chapter 96. Is there someone who would like to read this? Okay, Rachel, go ahead, ma'am.
4 observable benefits for one who learned the teachings by ear. Monks, when one has learned the teachings by ear, recited them verbally, examined them with the mind, and penetrated them well by view, 4 benefits are to be observed. What 4? Here, a monk masters the teachings, discourses, mixed prose and verse, expositions, verses, inspired spoken phrases, quotations, birth stories, amazing accounts, and questions and answers. He has learned those teachings by ear, recited them verbally, examined them with the mind, and penetrated them well by view. He passes away muddled in mind and is reborn into a certain group of heavenly beings. There, the happy one recites passages of the teachings to him. The arising of his memory is sluggish, but then that being quickly reaches distinction. This is the first benefit to be observed when one has learned the teachings by ear, recited them verbally, examined them with the mind, and penetrated them well by view. Again, a monk masters the teachings, discourses, mixed prose and verse, expositions, verse-inspired spoken phrases, quotations, birth stories, amazing accounts, and questions and answers. He has practiced those teachings by ear, recited them verbally, examined them with the mind, and penetrated them well by view. He passes away muddled in mind and is reborn in a certain group of heavenly beings. There, the happy ones do not recite passages of the teachings to him, but a monk with psychic potency who has attained mastery of the mind teaches the teachings to an assembly of heavenly beings. It occurs to him, this is the teachings and discipline which I formerly lived the spiritual life. The arising of his memory is sluggish, but then that being quickly reaches distinction. Suppose a man were skilled in the sound of a kettle drum. While traveling along a highway, he might hear the sound of a kettle drum and would not be at all confused or uncertain about the sound. Rather, he would conclude, that is the sound of a kettle drum. So too, a monk masters the teachings. The arising of his memory is sluggish, but then that being quickly reaches distinction. This is the second benefit to be observed when one has followed the teachings by ear, recited them verbally, examined them with the mind, and penetrated them well by view. Again, a monk masters the teachings, discourses, mixed prose and verse, expositions, verses, inspired spoken phrases, quotations, birth stories, amazing accounts, and questions and answers. He has learned those teachings by ear, recited them verbally, examined them with the mind, and penetrated them well by view. He passes away muddled in mind and is reborn into a certain group of heavenly beings. There, the happy ones do not recite passages of the teachings to him, nor does a monk with psychic potency who has attained mastery of mind teach the teachings to an assembly of heavenly beings. However, a young heavenly being teaches the teachings to an assembly of heavenly beings. It occurs to him, these are the teachings and discipline in which I formerly lived the spiritual life. The arising of his memory is sluggish, but then that being quickly reaches distinction. Suppose a man were skilled in sound of a conch. While traveling along a highway, he might hear the sound of a conch, and he would not be at all confused or uncertain about the sound. Rather, he would conclude, that is the sound of a conch. So too, a monk masters the teachings. The arising of his memory is sluggish, but then that being quickly reaches distinction. This is the third benefit to be observed when one has learned the teachings by ear, recited them verbally, examined them with the mind, and penetrated them well by view. Again, a monk masters the teachings, discourses, mixed prose and verse, expositions, verses, inspired spoken phrases, quotations, birth stories, amazing accounts, and questions and answers. He has practiced those teachings by ear, recited them verbally, examined them with the mind, and penetrated them well by view. He passes away muddled in mind and is reborn in a certain group of heavenly beings. There, the happy ones do not recite passages of the teachings to him, nor does a monk with psychic potency who has attained mastery of mind teach the teachings to an assembly of heavenly beings, nor does a young heavenly being teach the teachings to an assembly of heavenly beings. However, one being who has been spontaneously reborn reminds another who has been spontaneously reborn. Do you remember, dear sir? Do you remember where we formerly lived the spiritual life? The other says, I remember, dear sir, I remember. The arising of his memory is sluggish, but then that being quickly reaches distinction. Suppose there were two friends who had played together in the mud. By chance, they would meet one another later in life. Then one friend would say to the other, "Do you remember this friend? Do you remember that friend?" And the other would say, "I remember, friend, I remember." So too, a monk masters the teachings. The arising of his memory is sluggish, but then that being quickly reaches distinction. This is the fourth benefit to be observed when one has learned the teachings by ear, recited them verbally, examined them with the mind, and penetrated them well by view. These are the four benefits to be observed when one has learned the teachings by ear, recited them verbally, examined them with the mind, and penetrated them well by view.
Okay, thank you, Rachel. So what the Buddha is talking about here is that if you've learned and practiced the teachings in a particular life, when you're reborn, having not gotten to enlightenment, that the memories of those teachings are going to go forward into this new mind. This is something that can be experienced. If you're noticing that when you study the teachings of the Buddha, they just make sense to you, they're quite clear, it's like, wow, this is just almost like you've learned them in the past, right? This is what the mind has the capability to do. That not only memories about the teachings of the Buddha, but you can have residual memories of your past lives as well. This is how people, in one way, can actually confirm the cycle of rebirth. That if you have memories in your current life of a life from the past, or maybe multiple lives in the past, you have those residual memories in your mind currently that you know that those lives happened, and you can confirm the cycle of rebirth that way. There's other ways to independently verify the cycle of rebirth, but this is just one way, is by having residual memories of your past lives. And some of the memories that actually come forward is if you've learned and practiced the teachings in a previous life, you can actually have residual memories of those teachings. And that's actually going to help you in this life to be able to more easily make your way to enlightenment. Here, the Buddha is talking about an individual who's being reborn into the heavenly realm, but this can happen within the human realm too. Like maybe you were in the human realm before, you studied and learned these teachings, and now you're reborn into the human realm again. You can have memories of those teachings that you studied in your previous life. Or maybe you were in the heavenly realm learning and practicing the teachings, and now you're reborn into the human realm, and you can have residual memories of those as well. And what the Buddha is saying here is that, yeah, maybe your mind is sluggish, it takes a little bit of time to be able to help you recall the teachings, but then you quickly reach distinction, meaning that you're able to more readily make your way to enlightenment, that it doesn't have to be this really long, drawn out process that it could take if you hadn't studied the teachings of the Buddha. If you hadn't studied the teachings of the Buddha in a past life and you're studying them in this life, no harm, no foul, right? Like, hey, whenever you get access to the teachings of the Buddha, that's a wonderful time to learn and practice them. It's just that if you're finding it much more challenging and harder to learn the teachings of the Buddha in this life, it could be because you haven't learned them in a previous life. No big deal. You have access to them now in this life. You can learn and practice and make your way all the way to enlightenment. But an individual who has learned and practiced in a previous life, they're going to find it to be a bit more straightforward in this life. So what the Buddha is helping you to be able to see is that if you learn and practice in this life, and for some reason you fall short of enlightenment for any reason, the work that you're doing in this life is going to benefit you in your next life. And that's just something that you can understand through a teaching like this. So let me know what questions that you have. You can put that into Facebook, YouTube, or Zoom, or you can raise your hand in Zoom and ask any questions that you like. So it looks like Samantha has a question. Go ahead, ma'am.
Thank you. It looks like from this teaching that, well, it's intimated that there are teachers in the heavenly realm. I haven't heard you speak about that before. Are they teachers such as yourself, or because I've always kind of wondered about the heavenly beings, if they just kind of have to flit around and find their own way, or if there are perhaps more advanced heavenly beings that can lead the way for others.
Yeah,
and also I think we skipped a chapter.
Okay, I had a feeling that we did, because when we got to chapter 96, I was like, hold on a second, that seems pretty quick. All right, so we'll go back and get that one. Thanks, Samantha. So heavenly beings can learn from human beings. So even though people tend to think about these realms as being in far distant places, all these beings are in the same time and space. So right now, wherever you are, there could be heavenly beings in that area, right? There could also be other formless beings like hell beings or afflicted spirits, but they don't tend to spend time around people who are doing things that are wholesome. But there can be heavenly beings that are hearing the things that we're talking about right now, and they can choose to learn from that. They tend to not do that because of their complacency, but they have the ability to do that. All these realms can communicate with each other. This is why a human being can communicate with heavenly beings or afflicted spirits or hell beings, and the heavenly beings can learn from human beings. But also within the heavenly realm, those beings having memories of their previous lives and of the teachings that they've studied in their previous lives, they can also share those teachings with each other because they can communicate within that realm as well. I wouldn't necessarily think of them as like a human teacher who's live streaming and, reading the Pali Canon. And, I don't think they're doing that kind of studying and teaching, but just kind of in conversation, sharing with each other.
Okay, thank you very much.
You're welcome. Okay, looks like Yusuf has a question. Go ahead, sir.
So if some heavenly being were listening to you right now and he has a question, what will he do?
I don't know. You have to ask him.
Okay. I have another question. I suspect that you had your memory of your past lives prior to the elimination of your all discontentedness.
Yes, I remembered past lives prior to where I am today. Yep.
So when you remember them, and did that help you to immediately eliminate all the discontentedness in this life, or you will still need to do a lot of work in matter of eliminating this discontentedness right now, this life?
I still needed to do a lot of work beyond that. So that by itself isn't going to eliminate your discontentedness. That helps you to independently verify the cycle of rebirth and the 5 realms of existence by observing your past lives. It can also help you to get some insight into where some of your cravings are coming from in this life. You can see that you had those same cravings in a previous life. But beyond that, in and of itself, it isn't helping you to eliminate discontentedness unless you had a craving and a longing, a yearning to know about the cycle of rebirth and the 5 realms of existence. And by learning about it and being able to independently verify it, your mind can let go of that craving. But by itself, what it does to be able to observe past lives is confirm the cycle of rebirth and helps you to be able to see that craving existed in your mind in previous lives, and you have some of those same cravings in this life too. But at the end of the day, you still need to eliminate those cravings, whether they existed in a previous life or they're new cravings that you acquired in this life. It doesn't really matter, because at the end of the day, you still need to eliminate them.
Okay.
All right, so it looks like Vibhav has a question. Go ahead, sir.
David, I just had a question on the use of the word chance in the last paragraph or second last paragraph. They said last when the 2 people who claimed the mud meet by chance. I was wondering why chance is used here, but hasn't you have taught before that there's nothing called chance, it's all karma?
Let's see. Suppose there were 2 friends who had played together in the mud by chance. Yeah, this is a word that is in there. I don't think of it as, chance. There's always a decision that's being made, right? But here, the word chance is being used. I didn't do that translation. I didn't see that word. But it's based on decisions that an individual is going to meet one another, right? At the end of the day, it's a decision that's being made, but somebody might see it as chance.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, let me see if we have any other questions here. Okay, I don't see any other questions, so thank you, Samantha, for telling me I skipped a chapter. I thought I had skipped something. There we go, 95. Okay, looks like Yusuf would like to read that one. All right, go ahead, sir.
Gender of 5 beings. Ananda, a monk, understands it is impossible, cannot happen, that a woman could be a fortunate one, a fully perfectly enlightened one. There is no such possibility, and he understands it is possible that a man might be a fortunate one, a fully perfectly enlightened one. There is such a possibility. He understands it is impossible, it cannot happen, that a woman could be a wheel turning monarch. There is no such possibility, and understands it is possible that a man might be a wheel turning monarch. There is such a possibility. He understands it is impossible, it cannot happen, that a woman could be Saka, ruler of the holy beings. there is no such possibility, and he understands it is possible that a man might be Saka. There is such a possibility. He understands it is impossible, it cannot happen that a woman could be Mara of the Mara, the evil one. There is no such possibility. And he understands it is possible that a man might be Mara. There is such a possibility. He understands it is impossible, it cannot happen that a woman could be Brahma, God. There is no such possibility. And he understands it is possible that a man might be Brahma, God. There is such a possibility.
Okay, thank you, Yusuf. So here the Buddha is talking about 5 individual beings, and he's saying that these are of a male gender. And whether you consider this to be true or not is a choice for you to make, but this is what the Buddha is talking about. And there are actually beings in the world that it's impossible for them to be male or it's impossible for them to be female. I've put some of those here, that like a clownfish, all clownfish are born as a male species. Whiptail lizards are all born as female, right? If every single species had male and female genders, that would be permanence. So there's some beings in the world that just are incapable of being one gender or another. And that's what the Buddha is talking about here. And sometimes when people read this, they think it's quite sexist, but the Buddha is not teaching that. He's not teaching something in terms of being sexist, and he's not saying that women are lesser of beings or anything like that. That's a perception that someone's mind might try to cling to when they learn something like this. And the way that you can see that what I'm sharing with you is true is that this being here, Mara, which is a very evil being, which is a very unwholesome being, the Buddha is saying that this being can only be male. Whereas if the Buddha was preserving certain positions and saying they can only be male, like God or a Buddha, and he was holding these up and saying, these can only be male, well, then, he would, if he was sexist, he would give the unwholesome beings to women, right? But that's not what he's talking about here. He's just talking about his experience and what he experienced through interaction with these beings and how he considers these beings to be one gender or another. And even this being Mara that is unwholesome, and people that are into wholesome things wouldn't be interested in being that being. He's saying this being is a male as well. So these are 5 types of beings that he's saying that they can only be male. Now, this one being here that he's talking about, a wheel-turning monarch. Wheel-turning monarch is an individual during the lifetime of the Buddha that would be like a king, right? Somebody who's ruling over a population of people, and they're doing that through the teachings of the Buddha. And when they're making decisions about their kingdom, they're doing it through the natural law of karma and the teachings of the Buddha. And during the lifetime of the Buddha, the monarchy and people who were ruling over populations of people were males, at least in the region of the world that the Buddha was in. Nowadays, we might actually be able to see that it's very possible for a woman to be a wheel-turning monarch. Like if a woman was a prime minister or president of a country, and she learned these teachings, and she was overseeing this population of people through the teachings of the Buddha and making decisions about laws and things like this and the way that this person is interacting in the world, we could very easily see how a woman could be a wheel-turning monarch. The Buddha was talking based on his perspective during his time frame. In terms of a Buddha, I understand that a Buddha is going to be a male. This being of Saka, this is not something that we necessarily talk much about during present times, but this was what the Buddha referred to as the ruler of the heavenly beings. Not really important, not really significant. Mara, I've had interaction with Mara. I would consider that being to be male. I've had interaction with God. I would consider that being to be male. But whether you consider these beings to be male or female, that's up to you. I'm not here to convince anybody of any particular thing. This is what the Buddha taught. This is what my experience has been in these particular situations. And he's just helping you to be able to see from his perspective that these beings are of one gender or another. Just like certain beings are going to be of one gender or another, like clownfish or whiptail lizards are going to be of one gender or another. So let me know what questions you guys have here on this chapter. Looks like Yusuf has some questions. Go ahead, sir.
Is there a reason those beings could not be a woman, or is it just like a natural process of life?
It's just a natural process of life. It's a natural law that the Buddha is describing. But here, I would say that this, while the Buddha was describing it through what he understood at the time about wheel-turning monarchs, I would say that that's completely different nowadays, because he probably could have never fathomed a woman ruling over a population of people, because it just didn't happen in that region of the world that he was in. Now, from what I understand, in Africa, there's some tribes and some population of people where the woman is the ruler of the tribe. But he probably was unaware of that, and he was just kind of talking based on his direct experience, because that's how a Buddha will typically teach, based on their own direct experience. I know that a Buddha is going to be male. I know that Mara and God are going to be male. This being of Sokka, it doesn't really matter. And then I just shared with you what I share about the wheel-turning monarch. So what people consider to be these things, it really doesn't matter. But if you interact with these beings, like when I interacted with Mara and God, I felt a very strong, dominant energy. And not that a woman can't be that, because there's plenty of strong women that are in the world. But just from my experience in interacting with Mara and God, I would consider them to be of a male gender. But that's not required to be able to make your way to enlightenment. But this is what the Buddha is helping you to be able to see.
Why do you keep saying that poor Saka, that he doesn't matter or something?
Because the cosmology that existed during the lifetime of the Buddha, it isn't required for you to be able to understand that same cosmology. When we think about hell, animal, afflicted spirits, the human realm, and the heavenly realm, we tend to generalize these realms as the heavenly realm and heavenly beings, and the hell realm and hell beings. But the Buddha had subcategories for all of these realms, where he talked in a lot of detail about each individual type of being. He actually subcategorized hell and heaven, where we don't need to know all of that today. During their lifetime, he understood that wisdom and he shared that wisdom, but it's not required in order to be able to eliminate discontentedness to know all the ins and outs of the cosmology that existed during that time. And this understanding of this being Sokka, the ruler of the heavenly beings, it is an understanding that you need in order to be able to eliminate discontentedness. Okay, let me see if we have any other questions. Okay, I don't see any other questions. So now we can move on to 97, which we already covered 96. So would someone like to read this one? Okay, Keely, go ahead, ma'am.
Thank you, Teacher David. The heaven named contact sixfold base. It is a gain for you, monks. It is well gained by you that you have obtained the opportunity for living the holy life. I have seen monks, the heaven named contact sixfold base. There, whatever form one sees with the eye is desirable, never undesirable, lovely, never unlovely, agreeable, never disagreeable. Whatever sound one hears with the ear, whatever odor one smells with the nose, whatever flavor one tastes with the tongue, whatever physical object one touches with the body, whatever material objects one recognizes with the mind is desirable, never undesirable, lovely, never unlovely, agreeable, never disagreeable. It is a gain for you, monks. It is well gained by you that you have obtained the opportunity for living the holy life. That's all. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Keely. So here, this is one of the subcategories of the heavenly realm. And the Buddha is saying that, yeah, this particular area within the heavenly realm, everything's agreeable. Nothing is disagreeable, meaning you're only experiencing conditioned pleasant feelings in this part of the heavenly realm. And we've talked about this before, how heavenly beings only experience pleasant feelings. This is why they tend to be complacent and they don't learn and grow and develop on the path to enlightenment, because they're not having that built-in motivation of the painful feelings. In the human realm, we have pleasant feelings, painful feelings, neither painful nor pleasant. So we tend to have built-in motivation to be able to make our way to enlightenment. But even in the human realm, there's a ton of complacency, even in the human realm, with that built-in motivation. So if you can see the complacency in the human realm with that built-in motivation, you can see that in the heavenly realm, sure, there's an enormous amount of complacency because everything's agreeable and you're experiencing exclusively pleasant feelings. So that's why the Buddha is saying, hey, it's of a benefit to you that you've actually attained this human life where now you have this built-in motivation to be able to make your way to enlightenment. This is a well-gained opportunity. The ideal existence to be able to make your way to enlightenment is here in the human realm. So the Buddha is essentially helping you to see in other discourses, and you could also surmise that in this discourse as well, that don't let this human life go to waste. Don't be complacent, right? Don't allow your time to just tick on by, where if it's a choice between, searching and surfing and scrolling through social media or doing some meditation, do the meditation, right? Because you're going to regret having not meditated. If it's a matter of, going out to the bar and partying and using drugs, or going to the temple and learning some teachings to be able to train your mind to get to enlightenment, go to the temple and learn some teachings to be able to get to enlightenment, because that's what's ultimately going to help you to experience this peace and joy. These drugs and alcohol, the sexual misconduct, the lying and stealing and all of those things, that's not going to lead to anything but misery and despair. But making your way towards enlightenment, that's what's going to lead to the best, most ultimate, wonderful thing that's ever occurred for you in your life, which is to experience this enlightened mental state. So it's a well-gained opportunity for an individual to be able to come into this human world and now live this holy life, to be able to train your mind to experience this complete peace and joy, which is the enlightened mental state. If each individual being in the world could experience enlightenment, even for just a few moments or a few minutes or a few hours or a few days, and they understood what that mental state is, and then they ultimately were becoming unenlightened again, where now they have to actually get to enlightenment, there's nothing that would stand in your way to be able to make your way to enlightenment. But because beings don't understand how peaceful and how joyful the enlightened mental state is, they tend to be complacent and they don't make their way to enlightenment. So if you can arise confidence in the Buddha and understanding that, yes, this individual left a royal life, he was the prince destined to become the king, he walked away from that life to be able to get to enlightenment, you can imagine that this enlightened mental state is something beyond what perhaps you can even imagine at this point in time. And don't allow anything to stand in your way of making your way towards that goal, that objective, or that interest, because getting to that enlightened mental state, you'll be experiencing the very best, most ideal life that you've ever experienced, and you'll be experiencing the peace and joy permanently. That's a permanent mental state that you'll be experiencing continuously on an ongoing basis, and it will be incapable of the mind actually reverting back to being unenlightened ever again. But if this was possible for everybody to experience enlightenment for a period of time, and then, okay, now that you've experienced it, now you got to make your way to it, this would be ideal. Because like, say you went to a really nice restaurant and you tasted a certain food and you're like, oh my goodness, this is the best food ever. And maybe you're a chef and now you would like to go figure out this recipe and putting together this recipe to be able to now produce this dish. You wouldn't allow anything to stand in your way of that, right? Because you're interested in getting back to that particular taste that you had experienced in a particular restaurant. And it's the same kind of thing with enlightenment, that if you truly understood the peace and joy, you would let nothing stand in your way. So that's what I encourage you to do, because you don't know how long this life is going to be. And rather than being complacent, just keep making your way towards it as a goal, objective, or interest. So let me know what questions you guys have here on this chapter. So chapter 98, is there someone who would like to read this one? Okay, looks like you or Richard. So Richard, maybe you can get the next one. All right, go ahead, Vibhav.
Impermanent, short-term, non-eternal heavenly beings. Monks, in the evening the lion, the king of beasts, comes out from his lair, stretches his body, surveys the four quarters all around, and roars his lions roar 3 times. Then he sets out in search of game. Whatever animals hear the lion roaring from the most part are filled with fear, a sense of urgency and terror. Those who live in holes enter the holes. Those who live in the water enter the water. Those who live in the woods enter the woods, and the bird resort to the sky. Even the royal bull elephants, bound by strong thongs in the village, towns, and capital cities, burst and break the bonds apart, frightened. They urinate and defecate and flee here and there. So powerful among the animals is the lion, the king of beasts, so majestic and mighty. So too monks, when the Tathagata arises in the world, an arahant, perfectly enlightened, accomplished in true wisdom and conduct, fortunate, knower of the world, unsurpassed dream of the persons to be tamed, teacher of heavenly beings and humans, the enlightened one, the perfectly enlightened one, he teaches a teaching thus. Such is personal existence, such the original personal existence, such the elimination of personal existence, such the way to the elimination of personal existence. When those heavenly beings who are long, beautiful, abounding in happiness, residing for a long time in magnificent places, palaces, hear the Tathagata's teaching of the teachings, for the most part they are filled with fear, a sense of urgency, and terror thus. It seems that they are actually impermanent, though we thought ourselves permanent. It seems that we are actually short-term, though we thought ourselves everlasting. It seems that we are actually non-eternal, though we thought ourselves eternal. It seems that we are impermanent, short-term, non-eternal, included in personal existence. So powerful is the Tathagata, so majestic and mighty is he in the world together with its heavenly beings. Thanks.
Okay, thanks, Vibhav. So what the Buddha is saying here is that, these heavenly beings who are off in the heavenly realm, living their pleasant feelings and being complacent and in all this essentially lap of luxury, right? That they're thinking that, this is permanent, like we've got to stay in this heavenly realm, this is going to be so great. But then when they hear the teachings of a Buddha, that the heavenly realm is not permanent, right? We can understand that through the universal truth of impermanence. Many people in the world, billions of people, have been taught that the heavenly realm is permanent. And that's the ultimate goal of life, is to actually live a certain life now, and then when you die, you're going to live in heaven permanently. Well, that's not actually true. And you can see that through the universal truth of impermanence, that everything around you is constantly changing, and that this heavenly realm is not permanent. And neither is hell either, right? None of these realms are actually permanent. But if you were hanging out in the heavenly realm in this life of luxury, so to speak, right, and you're thinking that, wow, this is going to be permanent, but now you hear the teachings of a Buddha that this isn't permanent, well, the Buddha is saying that these heavenly beings essentially have this fear, and now there's this new sense of urgency that arises in their mind because they're starting to realize that, oh my goodness, this existence in the heavenly realm is not permanent, right? So that's what the Buddha is essentially saying here. So this is, I think, actually kind of a little bit funny. That's why I'm kind of chuckling as I'm teaching you guys this. But let me know what questions you guys have in this particular case of this discourse. Okay, it looks like maybe Vibhav. Go ahead, sir.
I was just wondering, if you look at all the religions that are out there, as you said, they always teach that, there's if you do good, you go to hell, like heaven, you do bad, you go to hell, and then you just mostly stay there. There's some religions like Buddhism and Hinduism, are the only ones or predominant teaching the cycle of rebirth. So I was just wondering, why is there so much misunderstanding of this, the true nature of heaven and hell and the cycle of rebirth and all this thing, outside of what the Buddha actually was able to see, and not more understanding of this truth in other religions as well.
It's not just the cycle of rebirth, it's all the teachings are not very well understood throughout the entire world. That's the lack of wisdom. That's the ignorance or the unknowing of true reality. Christianity and Muslim teachings oftentimes teach that the heavenly realm is permanent, and that's the ultimate goal, to be able to get to the heavenly realm. But there's also evidence that says that at one time Jesus Christ did teach the cycle of rebirth, but that was removed from Christian teachings around the 500 AD time frame, 543 AD. There was apparently a pope who, the king at that time, it was a Catholic pope that was trying to get the pope to remove the cycle of rebirth out of Christian teachings, and the pope wouldn't do it. And they put the pope in prison. And after 2 years, the pope eventually relented and apparently took out the cycle of rebirth out of Christian teachings. But he left one thing in Christian teachings, which is where Jesus said, I will come again. That's the cycle of rebirth. People oftentimes think Jesus is going to float down from the clouds and snap his fingers and everything instantly changes, but this isn't true, because if that was true, that's what he would have did the first time. Why would he wait in order to be able to do that? If Jesus is going to come back into the world, he's going to come back into the world through the womb of a woman, just like he did the first time, right? So there's a lot of teachings out there that people are just believing, and they haven't been taught to learn, reflect, and practice to be able to see the truth for themselves. And because they don't even know the very first teaching of the universal truth of impermanence, it's very easy for the mind to believe that the heavenly realm is permanent, or that the cycle of rebirth doesn't exist, and they think that there's only one life and all these kinds of things. But when you investigate this and you penetrate into it more and more, that's where the wisdom comes along. So there's a lack of wisdom all throughout the world about countless things, not just these topics.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Okay, I don't see any other questions anywhere. So let's move to chapter 99. Is there someone who would like to read this chapter? Oh yeah, that's right, Richard. Go ahead, sir.
A harmful view of Bhakka the Brahma. Monks, on one occasion I was living at Ukata in the Subhaga Grove at the root of a royal sala tree. Now on that occasion a harmful view had arisen in Bhakka the Brahma thus: this is permanent, this is everlasting, this is eternal, this is total, this is not subject to pass away. For this is where one is neither born, nor ages, nor dies, nor passes away, nor reappears. And beyond this, there is no other escape. I knew with my mind the thought in the mind of Bhakka the Brahma. So just as quickly as a strong man might extend his flexed arm, or flex extended arm, I vanished from the root of the royal sal tree in the Subhaga Grove at Kata, and appeared in that Brahma world. Bhakka the Brahma saw me coming in the distance and said, "Come, good sir, welcome, good sir. It is long, good sir, since you found an opportunity to come here. Now, good sir, this is permanent, this is everlasting, this is eternal, this is total, this is not subject to pass away. For this is where one is neither born, nor ages, nor dies, nor passes away, nor reappears. And beyond this, there is no other escape." When this was said, I told Bhakka the Brahma, "The worthy Bhakka the Brahma has lapsed into ignorance. He has lapsed into ignorance in that he says of the impermanent that it is permanent, of the short term that it is everlasting, of the non-eternal that it is eternal, of the incomplete that it is total, of what is subject to pass away that it is not subject to pass away. And where one is born, ages, dies, passes away and reappears, that here one is neither born, nor ages, nor dies, nor passes away, nor reappears. And when there is another escape beyond this, he says there is no other further escape beyond this. Having seen fear in being, and having seen that being will cease to be, I did not welcome any kind of being, nor did I cling to excitement." At that, the Brahma and the Brahma's assembly and the members of the Brahma's assembly were struck with wonder and amazement, saying, "It is wonderful, sirs, it is marvellous, the great power and great might of the ascetic Gotama. We have never before seen or heard of any other ascetic or Brahmin who had such great power and such great might as hath this ascetic Gotama, who went forth from a Sakyan clan. Sirs, though living in a generation that excites in existence, that takes excitement in existence, that rejoices in existence, he has eliminated existence at its roots."
Okay, thank you, Richard. So here, this is the Buddha talking about the unknowing of true reality that existed during his lifetime. He's specifically talking to some Brahmin, who are essentially like Hindu priests, that didn't understand the universal truth of impermanence, that they're thinking that all these things around them are permanent. This is a very obvious thing. Once you learn the universal truth of impermanence and you look around the world and you can independently verify it within a few moments, a few minutes, but it's just amazing how many of us go around without this understanding throughout our life. And it's not until you understand the teachings of a Buddha that you can then be understanding of this universal truth of impermanence. And now, even just this very beginning teaching, these Brahmin are amazed at how wise the Buddha is. So that's what they're referring to here. And if you had this view that the world is permanent, then that's why it's being referred to as a harmful view, because you need to be able to understand that the mind craves permanence. That's the whole reason why it keeps experiencing anger and sadness and frustration and irritation and annoyance and all these other feelings that are discontentedness. If you don't understand that, then it's such a harmful view to think that things around you are permanent, because you'll never be able to have the breakthrough to understanding that things are impermanent, to be able to then train your mind to not crave permanence, which means you would essentially be stuck in your stress and anxiety and resentment and hostility and bitterness your entire life. But by coming to the understanding of the universal truth of impermanence, this can be a real breakthrough along with the Four Noble Truths. So that's what it seems like these Brahmin are actually experiencing. Like, whoa, we had no idea all these things around us are impermanent, and here they are thinking that things are permanent. So let me know what questions you guys have on this particular chapter. Okay, so I see a question coming in here on YouTube. It doesn't look like it's complete though. It says, and also engage in it without attachment. Is it possible? Thank you. I think what you're asking is it impossible for you to engage and be involved in a particular situation without attachment? The answer is yes, because the attachment isn't the fact that you're involved in something or that you have an object like the phone. Instead, the attachment is the mind's longing, yearning, and craving for things. So you need to get to the point where you can enjoy that piece of chocolate cake, for example, without being attached to it and without clinging to it, without allowing the mind to have conditioned pleasant feelings. And this is where the training of the Eightfold Path comes in. You need to learn how to have something like a mobile phone and use it wisely without craving for it to be permanent. That's where the mind's longing, yearning, because now when you misplace it, when it gets broken, when it gets lost, when it gets stolen, you'll be upset, you'll be angry, you'll be frustrated, you'll have discontent feelings. But if you can learn how to not be attached through the Eightfold Path and all the other training that I share, then you can learn how to have these things, but just not be attached to them. And that's where the liberation and the freedom comes in, that now you can navigate the world being unattached to these things, but you can still enjoy all the things that you're involved in, whether it's relationships or your professional life or any other aspect of your life. You can enjoy all of this just without attachment. And that's what the mind needs to learn how to do, because it doesn't know how to do that in the unenlightened state. Okay, it looks like maybe Vibhav has a question. Go ahead, sir.
David, I was wondering, when you explained this, I didn't quite understand. You were saying he was talking with the Brahmin, or is he, this could seem like he's saying that Brahma had thought that he was permanent, and then he said it told Brahma that he's impermanent, not.
Yeah, so this Baka, the Brahma here, that's what he's saying, the harmful view in this person's mind or this being's mind.
So the Baka, the Brahma, he lives in the Brahma world, or because he's saying that he disappeared into the Brahma world, and then that's where the Baka, the Brahma was.
Yeah, a Brahma is a god. So the Buddha taught multiple gods during his life. So this must have been one of the gods that he was teaching that existed during his life. Where nowadays we understand there's only one god, but during the lifetime of the Buddha, they talked about multiple gods.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm. Okay, let me just check one more time. I don't see any other questions. So now we'll go to the last chapter for today, which is chapter 100. Is there someone who would like to read this one? Okay, Tonka, go ahead, ma'am.
There are amongst some ascetics and Brahmins who are partly eternalist and partly non-eternalist, who proclaim the partial eternity and partial non-eternity of the self and the world in 4 ways. On what grounds? 1. There comes a time, monks, sooner or later, after a long period, when this world contracts. At the time of contraction, beings are mostly reborn in the Abhasara Brahma world, and there they dwell, mind-made, feeding on excitement, self-luminous, moving through the air, glorious, and they stay like that for a very long time. But the time comes sooner or later, after a long period, when this world beings to expand. And this expanding world, an empty palace of Brahma, appears, and then one being, from exhaustion of his lifespan or of his merits, falls from the Abhasara world and arises in the empty Brahma palace. And there he dwells, mind-made, feeding on excitement, self-luminous, moving through the air, glorious. And he stays like that for a very long time. Then in his being, who has been alone for so long, there arises unrest, discontent, and worry. And he thinks, oh, if only some other beings would come here, and other beings from exhaustion of their lifespan or of their merit fall from the Abhasara world and arise in the Brahma palace as companions for this being. And then monks, that being who first arose, there thinks, I am Brahma God, and great Brahma, the conqueror, the unconquered, the all-knowing, the all-powerful, the Lord, the maker and creator, ruler, appointer and orderer, Father of all that have been and shall be. These beings were created by me. How so? Because I first had this thought, oh, if only some other beings would come here. That was my wish, and then these beings came into this existence. But those beings who arose subsequently think, this friend is Brahma God, great Brahma, the conqueror, the unconquered, the all-knowing, the all-powerful, the Lord, the maker and creator, ruler, appointer and orderer, Father of all that have been and shall be. How so? We have seen that he was here first, and that we arose after him. And this being that arose first is longer lived, more beautiful and more powerful than they are. And it may happen that some being falls from that realm and arises in this world. Having arisen in this world, he goes forth from the household life into homelessness. Having gone forth, he, by means of effort, exertion, application, earnestness, and right attention, attains to such a degree of mental concentration that he thereby recalls his last existence, but recalls none before that. And he thinks that Brahma, he made us, and he is permanent, stable, eternal, not subject to change, the same forever and ever. But we who were created by Brahma, we are impermanent, unstable, short-lived, fated to fall away, and we have come to this world. This is the first case whereby some ascetics and Brahmin are partly eternalists and partly non-eternalists. 2. And what is the second way? There are amongst certain heavenly beings called corrupted by pleasure. They spend an excessive amount of time addicted to happiness, play, and enjoyment, so that their mindfulness disappears. And by the disappearance of mindfulness, those beings fall from that state. And it can happen that a being having fallen from that state arises in this world. Having arisen in this world, he goes forth from the household life into homelessness. Having gone forth, he, by means of effort, exertion, application, earnestness, and right attention, attains to such a degree of mental concentration that he thereby recalls his last existence, but recalls none before that. He thinks those divine heavenly beings who are not corrupted by pleasure do not spend an excessive amount of time addicted to happiness, play, and enjoyment. Thus their mindfulness does not disappear, and so they do not fall from that state. They are permanent, stable, eternal, not subject to change, the same forever and ever. But we who are corrupted by pleasure spend the excessive amount of time addicted to happiness, play, and enjoyment. Thus we, by the disappearance of mindfulness, have fallen from that state. We are impermanent, unstable, short-lived, fated to fall away, and we have come to this world. This is the second case. 3. And what is the third way? There are amongst certain heavenly beings called corrupted in mind. They spend an excessive amount of time regarding each other with jealousy. By this means, their minds are corrupted. On account of their corrupted minds, they become very in body and mind, and they fall from that place. And it can happen that a being having fallen from that state arises in this world. Having arisen in this world, he goes forth from the household life into homelessness. Having gone forth, he, by means of effort, exertion, application, earnestness, and right attention, attains to such a degree of mental concentration that he thereby recalls his last existence, but recalls none before that. He thinks those divine heavenly beings who are not corrupted in mind do not spend an excessive amount of time regarding each other with jealousy. They do not become corrupted in mind or vary in body and mind, and so they do not fall from that state. They are permanent, stable, eternal, not subject to change, the same forever and ever. But we who are corrupted by mind spend an excessive amount of time regarding each other with jealousy. Thus we, by the disappearance of mindfulness, have fallen from that state. We are impermanent, unstable, short-lived, fated to fall away, and we have come to this world. This is the third case. 4. What is the fourth way? Here a certain ascetic or Brahmin is an expert in logic, a reasoner, hammering it out by reason, following his own line of thought. He argues, whatever is called eye or ear or nose or tongue or body, that is impermanent, unstable, non-eternal, liable to change. But what is called thought or mind or consciousness, that is a self that is permanent, stable, eternal, not subject to change, the same forever and ever. This is the fourth case.
Okay, thank you, Tonka. So what the Buddha is talking about is 4 situations where people don't understand the universal truth of impermanence. And he's giving you those examples to be able to help you see that there's people in the world who think that things are permanent around them. And he's going into a lot of detail about these 4 different cases in which people think this way, even people who might consider themselves ascetics. Well, if someone hasn't understood the very first teaching of the Buddha to understand the universal truth of impermanence, we wouldn't even be able to refer to them as an ascetic because they haven't understood the very first teaching. They might be wearing a robe, they might be shaving their hair, they might be wearing white clothes and shaving their hair, but if they haven't understood the universal truth of impermanence, then they haven't understood the very first teaching of the path to enlightenment, that all things around you are constantly changing. That's a very important part of the path. That's right from the very beginning. So the Buddha is helping you to be able to see that, yes, there's people out there that think this way, but you can understand the truth to be able to independently verify that the universal truth of impermanence is actually true. So let me know what questions you guys have on this chapter. Okay, I'm not seeing any questions here. So I'm just going to end by thanking all of you guys for joining. Thank you for reading. Thank you for your questions. Just thank you for your interest in learning and practicing the teachings of the Buddha. Next week, we're going to be in our next 10 chapters, which is 101 through 110. I'd like to draw your attention to chapter 105, because in there, if you have a version of the book that was published in the last 1 year, you'll see in chapter 105, in the part that I share, that there's 17 different criteria of how to independently verify the cycle of rebirth. And this would be a great opportunity for you to be able to study that. Because if you haven't independently verified the cycle of rebirth yet, it's not like you're going to read this and then instantly verify it. But you'll have 17 different criteria of how you can work towards verifying the cycle of rebirth, because that would be a helpful part of your journey to enlightenment, to be able to see the truth around that. So we can discuss those things when we get into our class next week. So if you get a version of this book, either downloading it or getting it from all the other places that you can get access to this book, you can see the 17 different criteria that help you to be able to understand how to independently verify the cycle of rebirth. And it's going to take you some time to work through that. And even in a week time, you might not be able to independently verify the cycle of rebirth, but at least you'll have the criteria and the ability to do that over a period of time. And if you have questions about any of those, we can discuss them in our class next week. So if you pay attention to chapter 105 in your reading, not only the words of the Buddha, but what I share, you'll be able to see how to independently verify the cycle of rebirth. Tomorrow in our group learning program, I'm going to be in chapter 7 of our book, Developing a Life Practice, The Path That Leads to Enlightenment. This is where you're going to be able to learn the 5 precepts, a householder's guide to daily practice. These are the 5 impactful decisions that you can make either wisely or unwisely that are going to lead to either wholesome results or unwholesome results. If you've heard that the Buddha taught no killing, no stealing, no sexual misconduct, no lying, and no intoxicants, the Buddha actually didn't teach that. That sounds like black and white. It sounds like rules and commandments, and the Buddha doesn't teach that way. So I'm going to use his original words to be able to help you understand these important teachings of the 5 precepts, and then I'm going to show you how to relate it to day-to-day decisions that you make in your life today. Because these natural laws and the way that the Buddha taught, it's timeless. You can apply this to your life nowadays, where you can see that these 5 precepts, when you learn them through the original words of the Buddha, can apply to what it is that you're encountering on a day-to-day basis. And that's how you would like to learn these, so that you can understand how to apply them in your day-to-day life. So I'm going to be teaching that tomorrow in our group learning program at 9 a.m. and 9 p.m. as well. Tomorrow, Thai time, Sunday at 3 p.m., I'm going to be starting this retreat that I teach once a year. It's titled Purification of the Mind to Attain Enlightenment. This is where I spend about an hour to an hour and a half on each individual fetter, explaining what it is, what the symptoms are, how to eliminate it, and how to know that you've actually eliminated it. I'm going to start it at 3 p.m. on Sunday. We just have a short session tomorrow up until 5 p.m. Then our sessions are going to be Monday through Friday from 9 a.m. to 12:30 p.m. And then in the evening, Thai time is going to be 6:30 p.m. to 8:30 p.m. So depending on where you are, you might actually be able to participate in this, because if you're in North, Central, or South America, those time zones might actually sync up really nicely to your time zone, and you'll be able to learn this, because this is the retreat that everything else builds up into, where an individual can learn these things. So like all the foundational classes, the harmony in relationships, experiencing the jhanas and the 4 stages of enlightenment, the retreat that I teach of everything you need to get to the first stage of enlightenment, the group learning program, the Pali Canon and English study group, everything feeds into this retreat, where you get the information that you need to be able to eliminate the 10 fetters and actually experience enlightenment. That's what purification of the mind is, to be able to attain enlightenment. So you could watch that live and participate live through our live stream on YouTube, Facebook, or through Zoom. Or if you can't attend live, there's always the ability to watch the recordings as well. And if you're here in Chiang Mai, you can actually come to the temple, because I'm going to be teaching them there. The morning sessions and the evening sessions are all going to be at the temple. And then in the middle of the day from 12:30 to 6:30, we have excursions where we're going to go out into the community and do things. And if people would like to join those, they're more than welcome to, or you can just use it as free time to do whatever you'd like to do. So this is what's going to be coming up in the next week. So again, thank you all for joining. Thank you for your interest to learn and grow. If you need anything from me, feel free to reach out. I'm here to help all of you. So have a very wonderful and lovely rest of your day. We'll see you next time. Sawadee-khap.
Thank you for listening to this podcast. To provide support for this podcast, visit patreon.com/support Buddha. To access more teachings, visit buddhadailywisdom.com. There, you will discover a full range of courses, retreats, and online resources to assist you on the path to enlightenment. Remember to establish a daily, consistent meditation practice, along with learning and practicing these teachings. A well-developed meditation practice is the foundation in which to train the mind to attain enlightenment.